We're going to get Judge Gorsuch confirmed. There'll be an opportunity for the Democrats to invoke cloture. We'll see where that ends.
If Judge Gorsuch fails to garner 60 votes, the answer isn't to irrevocably change the rules of the Senate. The answer is to change the nominee.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer both showing no signs of blinking in the showdown over the nomination of Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. And we're back now with the panel. Well, Laura is our resident Supreme Court watcher and a former Supreme Court clerk under Clarence Thomas. And I'm not taking sides here. I'm just really asking because it just gets worse and worse and worse. Is there any way out of these just ever more partisan wars? And what do you think? And I'm not saying this is the fault of one side or the other about the fact that it looks like this week we're going to see a part of the institution of the Senate change and turning more into the House, where it doesn't take a bipartisan majority of 60, 51 votes, a simple majority can decide any nomination.
Yeah, well, I think McConnell was right in his point. This is a 200-year Senate tradition that will be forever changed. And Chuck Schumer, I mean, I hate to say this during a Sunday during Lent, but he's absolutely fraudulent in the way he characterizes this. There has never been a partisan filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee. When my former boss was confirmed during all of the controversy surrounding Clarence Thomas, there wasn't a filibuster. He was confirmed, and it wasn't the largest of margins, but he was confirmed. The vote went forward, and he ended up sitting on the Supreme Court, much to the consternation of the left. But this is ridiculous.
Nobody comes into this with clean hands. I mean, Republicans were filibustering lower court judges in the Bush administration, not in the Bush administration, in the Clinton administration. I mean, this has gone back and forth.
Well, the Supreme Court nomination process has never gotten to this point where there is a threat of a partisan filibuster. McConnell he knows this stuff inside and out, and he's completely right the way he characterizes it. Now, I understand that the Democrats don't want Neil Gorsuch to be on the court. I get that. But he's going to be on the court. This, in the end, hurts Chuck Schumer. This hurts the Democrats because if you get rid of this rule, rule, now you will only be able to have 52 justices to confirm the next nominee. That could
51
be
senators.
51 senators, and it could be the next opening will come in June.
Well, that's what I want to pick up on with you, Jerry. As explosive as this is a conservative Judge Scalia being replaced by another conservative Judge Gorsuch. There is a lot of talk, and it's speculation, who knows, in June that Anthony Kennedy, the key swing vote in the Senate, might retire. And at that point, Trump is naming somebody who can shift the balance of the court for 3 decades.
Right, and that's the argument that some Democrats even are using for not letting the nuclear option be invoked this time. This is not an appointment that changes the ideological balance of the court. This preserves it. It's a status quo shift. The next one probably won't be or may not be. So maybe you ought to preserve your firepower until then. I think the problem right now is my colleague Jess Braven wrote a good piece this week saying they're dueling narratives here. The Democratic narrative is this is a stolen Supreme Court seat. This belonged to Merrick Garland. It was supposed to be filled by President Obama. Republicans stopped it. Republicans say there was a national referendum on who should be on the Supreme Court. It was called the presidential election. We won. This is basically a mandate. Those two can't be reconciled.
No, that's right. And as I say, there are no clean hands in this, and there's perfect hypocrisy. Let's turn to the Trump agenda in the wake of the health care defeat and the first big issue, which I talked about with Senator McConnell, which is the real possibility of a government shutdown on April 28th. Julie, the president has been attacking members of the House Freedom Caucus this week. At least they're talking about reaching out to Senate Democrats and House Democrats. Do you have the sense that they have any legislative strategy going forward on this issue, preventing a shutdown, or anything else?
No.
Okay, Gillian.
Moving on. No, look, I mean, they talk about a government shutdown and feeling confident that they are going to be able to avoid that. They talk about reaching out to Democrats. They talk about trying to put pressure on the House Freedom Caucus, but it's largely just talk at this point. When you look at the Democrats, there is almost no indication that Democrats are ready to start working with this administration on even something like an infrastructure package, which in theory should have some bipartisan support. And when it comes to the House Freedom Caucus, you see these guys responding to these tweets from Trump. They are not feeling the pressure. They are not backing away. And this has always been a relationship that has been a little odd between Trump and the Freedom Caucus, because they may all be outsiders. They may all want to shake up Washington. But the Freedom Caucus guys come in with a really clear ideology.
Quick specific question that I also asked McConnell. Is the president, do you think, willing to shut down the government to insist that funding for the wall, $1.5 billion, be in the spending bill, which Democrats say will blow it up?
That is a great question, and that I think could be a real pressure point here. I mean, if Trump is willing to go to the mat for the wall funding, it's going to be hard, I think, for him to get support on both sides for that.
And I was going to say, then his supporters will say, you promised us the wall.
And this was one of the clearest promises of that campaign.
We ask you for questions for the panel. And on the growing divide inside the GOP, we got this tweet from someone known as Frank the Tank, who writes, is it really on the divide inside the GOP? Is it really a divide, or are they just playing politics as usual at the expense of the people? Gillian, how do you answer Frank the Tank? And I want you to address him by name as you say that.
Mr. Tank? Is that Mr. Tank, this is for you. I think whether this started out, as more politics as usual or is really grounded in ideological opposition is debatable, depending on what side of the aisle you sit on. But what's clear to people like me who sit somewhere in between is that this has now become a very real divide, maybe entrenched in the wake of the collapse of the health care bill. I think what we're seeing in the last few days especially is the White House digging in its heels. They've drawn up, as you mentioned, a kind of a hit list where they're now targeting people individually, like
by name in tweets.
By name, Representatives Amash, Meadows, Sanford. There's a few others. And what we're seeing on the side of the Freedom Caucus is they're now gearing up for their future. What is our role going to look like in the tax reform debate? How are we going to make inroads there? So I think, again, the origins of this and what the original sin is kind of OBE at this point. The battle lines have been drawn now, and I don't see a way that this is going to improve over the next few weeks.
And as I said to Julie, the question is there an end game here? Does the administration have a game? If they're going to alienate the House Freedom Caucus and not reach out to Democrats, there's a problem. Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday.